What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. So we are going to take a look at a clip from Monday's Newsnight show where host Emily Maitlis was talking to the Times columnist Matthew Parris and writer Douglas Murray. They are talking about the public getting used to words like no deal Brexit and the other scare tactics these politicians and RemainStream media put out there. Maybe the BBC will learn its anti-Brexit Project Fear campaigns don't work. Let's check it out.
So how does that shift start to happen, if it does? Joining us now, Times columnist Matthew Parris and Douglas Murray, the author of The Strange Death of Europe. People get used to things the whole time, don't they, Matthew? The things that you think will never be acceptable.
They get used to words after a while, and the words no deal have been repeated so often now that I think people are used to the words. And so the task of the anti-no deal people becomes more difficult. We have to persuade them what the words actually mean, because the words don't create the shock that they used to any longer.
Or that the shock has now been built into the understanding. So when you talk about, you know, whatever it is, the unemployment rates or the fall of the pound, or when you press the nuclear button and talk about fresh food or fresh water supplies, people just, they let it wash over them now.
I think it's because they don't believe it. They just don't believe anything they hear any longer. They have no idea what's going to happen, and they've heard politicians talking, and they tend just to discount it all.
So we hear from the Remoaning Times journalist who thinks because the public no longer fear no deal like the remoaners do, it's becoming harder and harder for Remain to use their propaganda against the public. Of course, these Remainers always forget one important fact when they come on broadcasters like the BBC, Sky News, etc. No one trusts these broadcasters. 99% of people take the information they get from the RemainStream media with a grain of salt the size of the Dead Sea. No one takes it as fact. It's common knowledge the BBC are liars and dirty smear merchants. Then we also have newspapers, which are an utter disgrace in themselves. The mainstream media cannot be trusted at all. Of course, Emily has to promote some more Project Fear nonsense, like no fresh food or water. Remember, guys, the Remoaners want us to think the UK is leaving the planet, not the EU. That's why they keep saying we won't have fresh food or water. Maybe if we leave the EU, then
Herr Juncker in the bunker.
We'll ban the UK from having fresh food and water somehow. I'm not sure how these idiots really think anyone believes we won't have fresh water. It's actually unreal. Times columnist is right. People don't believe you, and the politicians talk as much shit as the media. Everything is a disaster this and chaos that. Why would people believe the Remoaners now? It was meant to be the end of the world in 2016 when the UK voted to leave, remember? People are waking up to the media bullshit. Now let's check out the next clip.
We talk sometimes, Douglas, about the Overton window, this sort of over-intellectualised idea that something that you could never have imagined suddenly seems much more palatable, much more credible. Do you feel that's where we are now?
I agree with Matthew that people are incredibly sceptical of every claim. I'm very sceptical of every claim that I hear about no deal, because we've had so many claims over the last 3 years, and so many of them have turned out to be untrue. There's been so much claim about the sky falling down, and yet there it remains. That's not, if I may say so, I mean, it's not that that's the problem. Underlying all of this is a very, very simple problem, which is that we were given a vote in this country 3 years ago, and it turned out that of the two options we had, there was only one we were really meant to vote for, and that in the 3 years since, the entire political class has made a horlicks out of doing it and has said, we don't understand what you meant when you voted to leave. It's impossible to understand what the general public meant when they ticked the leave box. And I just think
don't believe that.
So many of us just feel it wasn't that complex. We were given a question. The British public voted by a majority, not a large majority, but a majority to leave.
But
and
Douglas,
yet here we are.
That ignores huge stretches, Douglas, because it ignores, for example, Nigel Farage sort of saying after the 2017 election that Norway seemed like the most logical conclusion now, that people talked of the economic union remaining, the single market remaining. Anyone can say that they think they understood the mandate.
All sorts of inconsistencies we can point to in every individual and every political party, and we can play that game endlessly. The point is that, as a country, we still haven't left. It's 3 years on now. It's very galling for a lot of people. And if we as a country are to ever, well, if we're going to even have a country at the end of this process, we have to just... Well, I think people who basically lost the vote have to get through these stages of grief. And if I can say so, there's one reason why they haven't, which is that all the time dangling over these last 3 years has been the possibility that we won't leave. And every time that hope has been injected back into the system, we get more of this endless
But Douglas,
bile.
you're just joining the politicians whom you say no one believes any longer. You have a point, though, when you say that simply repeating the mantra, the people voted to leave, the people voted to leave, has had, I think, quite a lot of power, has had quite a lot of force. And what those of us who are not at all sure about the wisdom of this have to do is persuade people to move on from thinking the people voted this or the people voted that to thinking what is now going to happen. And that, I think, is where we're having trouble shifting people's imagination.
So we hear Emily Spunk Trumpet Maitlis ask Douglas if no deal is just accepted. And Douglas points out what I have said about the last clip. People don't believe these claims from media hags like her, or the complete fuckpigs they get on shows to spout this Project Fear bullshit. Douglas points out the ridiculous claims made that never come to pass, saying the sky was meant to fall, but it still remains there, of course. I'm sure remoaners have claimed in the past that the sky would fall in the event of Brexit somewhere along the lines, given what we've heard recently. Douglas rightly states that the topic is pointless because at the end of the day, we was given a vote 3 years ago. It turned out that the two options we had, there was only really one we were supposed to vote for. Meaning Remain, of course, because the political shitweasels have done their best to avoid honouring the democratic vote, calling out the people who claim Leave voters didn't know what they wanted or what they voted for. He is right, it's not complex. People voted to leave. Leave with a deal if possible. If not, then leave on WTO terms, as that is still a deal. It's a fucking trade deal, you idiots. We have to remember that all of this is the logical common sense thing to do. Of course, the host and Ramona can't let him continue talking sense, so they shut him down saying it's ignoring what Nigel Farage says. Well, excuse me, was Nigel Farage in government during the 2016 referendum? No, he fucking wasn't. The same as he is now, he was an MEP. What people say is irrelevant, you stupid commie cumbucket. The people voted to leave, that is all that matters. Who said what and when is irrelevant. Of course, everyone wanted a deal, so when Nigel said a Norway deal is a logical model for the UK, that was him discussing an ideal situation. But this is the real world, you entitled bint. Sometimes you don't get what you want, and the ideal situation is not an option, so you have to do the next best thing. I expect you was brought up with a silver spoon in your mouth or up your arse, so you have no comprehension of grafting to get where you need to in life. Luckily for the UK, it's full of people who will put the work in to make the best of any situation instead of crying about it on national TV because your side lost the democratic vote. It's people like that who will see this country through the times ahead. Not worthless shitweasels like you and this Times columnist who are constantly complaining about how disastrous everything's gonna be. Douglas points out that 3 years after the vote, we've still not left the EU, and the people who lost the vote need to get over their Brexit derangement syndrome and accept we had a nationwide democratic vote and Leave won it. He then blames the undemocratic shitweasels like Toe Swinson, who sit there calling for a second referendum giving these Remainers false hope that they will stay in the EU. I like this guy. He seems like he has his head on straight and supports democracy. The Remoaner is forced to admit that the term the people voted to leave has a lot of force because of course it does. We had a democratic vote that said we should leave the EU, so when people say it, the public agrees because we support democracy. Remoaners think democracy is to follow the will of the people as long as it does not go against what they want. Of course, the Times journalist wants them to move on from supporting democracy to worrying about his scare stories regarding the future. I tell you what, mate, bring me these claims your paper makes with some real scientific evidence and we will start believing you. Your ideology is not enough to persuade me though. Let's move on to the next clip.
Truth that the mandate doesn't exist anymore. We don't actually know what people voted for entirely. The mandate becomes whatever public opinion now accepts. I mean, for you, the mandate was people voted to leave, you know, everything.
It's just to leave.
But there isn't a just to leave because we don't know what just to leave and remain in the union with Ireland.
It would be not
Scotland.
being in 2019, still having this discussion, but having left. That's what leaving would have been.
But again, you still haven't explained it. You haven't explained whether that means that we leave the union because of the Northern Ireland border or we leave the union because Scotland hasn't agreed or whatever it is. You can't say just to leave because the mandate becomes whatever public opinion accepts now. Isn't that true?
No. I think both sides actually rather let the public down in that we really didn't discuss leaving without a deal during the referendum campaign. Dominic Raab was
insists that we did.
completely wrong about that this morning. morning, I can't think there's a single viewer who remembers an in-depth discussion of leaving with no deal during the referendum campaign. The Remainers didn't talk about it. I don't think we thought about it. The Leavers didn't talk about it. They talked about getting the best deal in history. And so there is this huge thing that has emerged since the referendum that no one knows how to handle.
I just don't agree. I think that the Brexit vote was one of 2 votes in the Western world in the last few years, which has just not been accepted by an elite. I don't say the elite, but an elite. In the media, in politics, in our parliament, and much more. And this is just a profoundly dangerous moment for our democracy. It's a very dangerous period because this is the first time, I think, since we've had the vote in this country, that we have voted and the vote has been simply rejected, or at least not accepted.
So Emily spouts the bullshit that the mandate for Brexit does not exist anymore, and we don't even know what we voted for. Is she having a fucking laugh? The mandate from the democratic referendum that every political party agreed to honour will be there until the result is delivered on. How you can sit there saying the mandate does not exist is beyond me. The mandate is not public opinion now, it's to honour the vote in 2016. Plain and simple. Public, media and political opinion is completely irrelevant. Democracy must be upheld, so the vote to leave has to be implemented. There is no way out of that, Emily. Douglas points out that the vote to leave was just to leave. This is the mandate. Of course, Emily can't let that go and start spouting all this shit about the union being in trouble and blah-de-blah-de-blah-de bullshit. Emily, the 2016 referendum was a UK-wide national referendum. All 4 British nations have to honour the result. They can't pick and choose to be part of the union because the people in power lost the vote. Scotland does not have to agree. The vote was national, not just in England. The SNP lost the vote for Scottish independence in 2014, and more people voted for Brexit in Scotland then voted for the SNP in the 2017 election. So I would say the union is fairly safe. Let's be honest here, Scottish people despise the SNP and Nicola Fishlip-Sturgeon. The Times journalist claims no in-depth discussions about no deal before the referendum had been made, even though the then PM stated, leaving with no deal is better than a bad deal. So I would say some pretty high up government ministers had been talking about it in advance of him saying that. I'm pretty sure they didn't come up with that on the fly, you idiots. Douglas rightly points out there have only been 2 elections in recent history that have not been accepted by some of the elites, the media and politicians. Of course, Brexit being one of them and the 2016 Trump elections being the other one. The difference is they could not ignore Trump winning, even if CNN and MSNBC still moan about it every day. He is right though. The way the Brexit vote is being ignored is dangerous to our democracy and the trust people have in it, because for the first time in history, a democratic vote is being outright ignored. It's unheard of to have political parties openly going against the democratic will of the people. It's a complete travesty. Let's check out the final clip.
The logical position for you now is no deal. You don't think it should be a bluff. You think it should be, if you believe that it is just to leave, that means just get out, no deal, go.
I don't know whether it's a bluff on the part of the government or not. I think it's unwise not to have had it on the table.
But purists like you.
I'm not a purist on this. I simply think that we should, by now, 3 years on, have been in the situation of not still having this discussion about what is it the public meant when they voted to leave. They've just voted to leave. It's complex, but not that complex.
It's a completely phantom discussion. Because we'll have to have a deal with the European Union. They're our largest trading partner. The only question is whether we have the deal now before we leave, or whether we leave and then have the deal. And if we do leave without a deal and negotiations start for a deal, they will raise all the same problems that Theresa May encountered over the last 3 years.
You know, the marriage analogy is always used, but if you walk out on a marriage, it doesn't mean that you're divorced. You still have to go back and work out the papers and the kids and the dogs and the record and all the rest of it, right? You still have to do something. You still have to carry on communicating to get there.
Sure.
So where?
Well, there's no such thing as no deal. Rory Stewart kept saying this, but he was a voice crying in the wilderness. We have to have a deal, Douglas. We do it after Brexit, fine, but we have to do it, don't we?
I think that the obsession about no deal, the warning again and again about it, is simply the latest, and maybe not the last, attempt by people who lost the vote in 2016 to say we found another way to show the public that they were wrong by another threat, another way to terrify people. And I simply think it is continuously pumping poison into the system. We have to find a way to leave. Okay. And for things like this no deal to be just
does it occur to you that we really believe that it is a bad idea?
It does occur to me, but lots of things are a bad idea. All sorts of elections, Matthew, have results that the public have, which we have to accept. We may think it's a bad idea. You and I might think it's a bad idea to elect Jeremy Corbyn. We'd still have to accept it if the public voted for it. We'd have to.
We're going to end there, but thank you both very much.
So the biased cum-bucket host tries to label the lone guy who supports democracy as someone who wants a no-deal Brexit and a Brexit purist, when not once did he say that. He wants democracy to be upheld. It's not too much to ask, is it? It should be a given, really. His whole point is that still 3 years down the line, we're still going on about this when it should have been dealt with long ago. The people voted to leave, that is all that should really matter, as he rightly states. The government can go for a deal, but if they can't get a good one, we go out on WTO terms. It's pretty fucking obvious. There is a deal waiting for us in WTO trade rules. The Times journalist is actually right when he says we will have a deal either way, because of course, if we leave without a deal, then we will make one after Brexit is done. We all knew this in advance, which once again rubbishes the Project Fear bullshit that we need a deal now. No. The EU needs us to make a deal now, because when we have gone, they have a weaker hand against us since we would be free of their bullshit, and they would still be the failing, undemocratic shitshow they have always been. He is wrong when he says they will raise the same problems. Once we have left, the same problems won't exist because they will have to work with us to make a deal, rather than against us, which is what they have been doing so far. Our own MP's negotiating team was working for the EU, not the UK, up until now. While we are in the EU, our negotiating position is not as good as it would be when we are out. The EU is doing all it can to stop us leaving. Their stance is based around that. Once we are out, they will have to change because they need us more than we need them. The Times journalist claims we need a deal because Rory the soy boy Stuart said so. Fuck what that cracked out gremlin looking fuckpig said. He is a remoaning tosspot Lib Dem plant in the Tory party if you ask me. The guy is lower than a snake's belly. He claims Rory was a voice crying in the wilderness. No, he was a voice crying to the echo chambers of Twitter that thought Twitter represented what the country thought. When he got absolutely trounced in the leadership contest, he had to eat that humble pie, so now he's a little bit salty. Rory thinks we should have the Maybot deal and a second referendum. So how the fuck can you quote him, you idiot? Douglas points out the no-deal scare tactics is the latest attempts to convince the public they was wrong to vote leave in 2016 with these stupid threats. He finishes up saying, even if we don't like the result of an election, we still have to respect what people voted for, which is obviously right. Democracy swings both ways at the end of the day. You win some, you lose some. If only the remoaners could stop crying and understand that basic fact. So, it was yet another biased panel with Emily being the remoaners' backup when anyone disagrees with their anti-democratic ideology that these idiots promote. Douglas Murray did well to rubbish the claims of these fuckpigs and call out the media and politicians who are openly trying to ignore a democratic vote for the first time in history. So I'm going to end the video there, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Remember to like, subscribe and share this video as it helps the channel a lot, and I will see you all in the next one.